Amanda sank into her worn-out armchair, her fingers brushing over an old photograph of her mother. The picture, framed in a simple wooden border, used to hang proudly in her childhood home. Now, it sat quietly on the side table next to her couch, a solemn reminder of time's relentless passage. Outside the window, the dim evening light bathed her small apartment in a muted, somber glow. Today wasn't just any day. It marked 5 years since her mother's passing. But instead of feeling warmth from fond memories, Amanda felt a hollow ache that she couldn't seem to shake. She reached for her tea mug on the table, the warmth of the ceramic grounding her in the present moment. But her mind wandered to distant memories. Sunday mornings filled with the comforting smell of her mom's freshly baked apple pie, the rhythmic creak of the wooden floorboards as her mom's footsteps moved through the house, calling her down for breakfast. These weren't just memories, they were echoes of a life Amanda feared she was slowly forgetting. With a quiet sigh, Amanda placed the mug back on the table. She glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. Its hands ticked forward with an almost mocking slowness. The day stretched endlessly before her. She couldn't even recall the last meaningful conversation she'd had with her mom before she was gone. It had happened so suddenly, leaving behind a chasm Amanda hadn't yet figured out how to bridge. Work, her daughter Lily, and the endless demands of adulthood had pushed those memories into the furthest corners of her mind. A sudden knock at the door pulled Amanda from her thoughts. She blinked, startled. Who could it be? She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not today, a day she preferred to spend in quiet solitude. Rising from her chair, she padded to the door and opened it, finding no one in sight. Instead, sitting neatly on the threshold was a small, carefully wrapped package. Her brow furrowed as she bent to pick it up. Attached to the box was a simple tag with elegant handwriting that read, "For the moments we wish we could relive." Amanda's chest tightened. Her fingers gripped the box as she straightened and looked down the hallway, hoping to catch sight of the sender. But the corridor was empty, bathed in the fading glow of evening. With a lingering sense of curiosity, she closed the door behind her and carried the mysterious gift to her living room. She placed the package on the coffee table, its unassuming brown wrapping and delicate twine giving no hint of what lay inside. Who could have sent this? And why today of all days? Amanda's eyes flickered back to the photograph of her mother. The ache in her chest grew heavier, as if her mother's presence lingered in the room, urging her forward. Taking a deep breath, Amanda began to unwrap the box, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't know what she was about to find, but something deep inside her told her this wasn't just any ordinary gift. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet understand. Amanda sat on the edge of her couch, the package resting in front of her like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the twine tied around the brown paper wrapping. Something about it felt too deliberate, too personal. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest as she carefully pulled at the knot, watching as the twine unraveled. Beneath the paper lay a small, faded teddy bear. It wasn't pristine or new. In fact, its fur was slightly worn, its stitching hinted at age and care. But it had been lovingly restored, its mismatched button eyes giving it a charm that was impossible to ignore. Amanda's brow furrowed as she picked it up, the soft weight of it resting in her hands. There was something achingly familiar about this bear. She turned it over, her fingers grazing the stitching along its back. Then she saw it, a tiny patch on its paw where her mother had once sewn it back together after Amanda had ripped it as a child. A gasp escaped her lips as the memory rushed back with vivid clarity. Amanda was 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, clutching the same teddy bear. Its arm hung limply, the stuffing spilling out like clouds escaping the sky. Tears welled in her eyes as she sobbed uncontrollably. Her mother had crouched down beside her, her soft hands brushing Amanda's hair out of her tear-streaked face. "Don't worry, sweetheart," her mom had said, her voice a soothing balm. "We'll fix it together." Amanda had watched in awe as her mother retrieved a small sewing kit, her nimble fingers carefully stitching the bear's arm back into place. "There," she'd said with a smile, holding the bear out to her daughter. "Good as new. He's a fighter, just like you." That was the first time Amanda had realized how much her mother's love could repair, Not just broken toys, but broken hearts. Back in the present, Amanda's eyes brimmed with tears. She hugged the teddy bear close to her chest, the scent of its fabric faint but comforting. She was overwhelmed by the weight of nostalgia, the sensation of being cradled in her mother's love once again. Her fingers brushed over a small button on the bear's paw she hadn't noticed before. It looked new, out of place compared to the rest of the bear's time-worn features. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pressed it. A voice she hadn't heard in years filled the room. "Amanda, sweetheart, remember, Mom loves you. Always." Amanda froze, her breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. It was her mother's voice, clear and warm, carrying the same loving tone that had comforted her throughout her childhood. Tears spilled freely down Amanda's cheeks. She pressed the button again, her hands trembling. "Amanda, sweetheart, remember, Mom loves you. Always." The words seemed to wrap around her like a blanket, filling the empty spaces in her heart that had been left behind when her mother passed. Amanda closed her eyes, letting the sound of her mother's voice wash over her. For a fleeting moment, she was a little girl again, safe and loved, sitting at the kitchen table while her mom cooked dinner. The memories came flooding back in waves. The laughter they'd shared during Saturday afternoon baking sessions, her mother's slightly off-key humming as she cleaned the house, the way she'd always kissed Amanda's forehead before tucking her in at night. Amanda hadn't realized how much she missed hearing her mother's voice, not just the words, but the way it carried love and reassurance in every syllable. She pressed the button one more time, whispering, "I miss you so much, Mom." Still clutching the bear, Amanda looked down at the box it had come in. Beneath the tissue paper lay a handwritten note. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. It was her brother, David. "Amanda, I found this when I was cleaning out Mom's old things. I thought you should have it. I know how much you've missed her, and I hope this helps you feel close to her again. She wanted us to know how much she loved us, even after she was gone. Press the button when you need her. She's always with us. Love, David." Amanda set the note down, her tears falling freely now. She hadn't spoken to David in months, not since their last argument about how to handle their mother's belongings. She had distanced herself, afraid that being around her childhood home would make the pain of her loss unbearable. But now she realized how wrong she had been. David had found this treasure, a piece of their mother's heart, and brought it back to her. The teddy bear wasn't just a gift, it was a bridge, connecting her to the love she thought she had lost forever. Amanda sat in silence for a long moment, her heart full yet aching. She thought of all the times she had avoided talking about her mother with Lily, her 8-year-old daughter. She didn't want to burden Lily with her grief, but now she saw it differently. This wasn't just about grief. It was about love, about preserving the connection that had shaped her. She picked up her phone and called David. When he answered, she could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." David's voice was soft on the other end. "I knew she'd want you to have it, Amanda. She never stopped loving us. Neither should we." Amanda placed the teddy bear gently on her lap, her fingers brushing over its patched paw. She glanced at the photograph of her mother, now bathed in the warm glow of the evening light. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. She knew this was only the beginning. There were stories to share, lessons to pass down, and love to preserve, and she would start with Lily. As Amanda gazed at the bear, she smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, "for everything." Amanda parked her car outside David's modest home, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared at the front door. The weight of the teddy bear resting on the passenger seat beside her was heavy, not in its physical presence, but in the emotions it carried. She hadn't seen her younger brother in months, not since their argument over what to do with their mother's belongings. The guilt that had been simmering inside her now felt unbearable. With a deep breath, Amanda grabbed the bear, stepped out of the car, and made her way to the door. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing David's familiar face. His expression softened when he saw her, and before Amanda could speak, he said, "You came." Amanda nodded, holding up the teddy bear. I had to. David ushered her inside, the living room still cluttered with stacks of old boxes and photo albums from their childhood home. Amanda noticed a small table in the corner, covered with sewing supplies, fabric scraps, and tools. You fixed it, Amanda said, her voice breaking slightly as she looked at the teddy bear in her hands. David nodded. I found it in one of Mom's old boxes. It was in terrible shape, missing an eye, torn in a few places, but I couldn't just throw it away. I knew what it meant to you. Amanda's throat tightened. She held the bear closer. And the voice? David smiled softly. That was in the same box. It's from an old cassette tape. Remember how Mom used to record herself reading stories? I think she made it in case we ever wanted to hear her voice when we were older. I found a company online that transfers old recordings onto toys like this. Amanda felt tears welling in her eyes again. She couldn't believe the effort David had gone through to bring this piece of their mother back to her. She loved us so much, Amanda, David said. Even after she's gone, she still wanted to make sure we knew. The siblings sat together on the couch, the teddy bear between them. For the first time in years, Amanda allowed herself to reminisce freely. Do you remember those Sunday mornings? She asked, her voice soft. David chuckled. You mean the apple pie mornings? Amanda laughed, the sound tinged with both joy and sorrow. Yes, she'd always wake up early, and the whole house would smell like cinnamon and baked apples by the time we got out of bed. And you'd always sneak into the kitchen and try to steal a slice before breakfast, David added with a grin. Amanda smiled, the memory vivid in her mind. She could almost feel the warmth of the kitchen, hear the soft hum of her mom's favorite song playing on the radio. Her mother would always pretend not to notice when Amanda stole a piece of pie, only to catch her with a playful scolding and a hug. It was the smell of home, Amanda whispered, the smell of safety. As the afternoon light faded, Amanda glanced at one of the boxes in the corner. It was labeled Books and Tapes. She got up and began rifling through it, her hands brushing over the worn covers of storybooks that had been staples of her childhood. Mom used to read this one all the time, Amanda said, holding up a tattered book with a picture of a bunny on the cover. David smiled. She had the whole story memorized. Even when we got older, she'd still recite it when you had trouble sleeping. Amanda ran her fingers over the cover, the feel of the textured paper igniting another memory. She was a child again, curled up under the glow of a bedside lamp. Her mother's voice filled the room, calm and steady as she told the story of the little bunny who wanted to touch the moon. You can be anything you want to be, her mother's voice had said in her mind. Even if it feels impossible, you can always reach higher. Amanda could hear the echo of those words now, feeling the same sense of comfort she had felt as a child. She looked at David and said, I wish I'd listened to her more. She always made everything seem possible. David leaned back, his gaze distant. Do you remember that day you came home crying because those kids were teasing you at school? Amanda nodded, the memory surfacing like a wave. She was 10 years old, clutching her teddy bear tightly as she sobbed in her bedroom. Her mother had come in, her face full of understanding. Without a word, she had sat beside Amanda and pulled her into a hug. You don't have to be what they think you are, her mother had said softly. You're more than enough just as you are, and you're not alone. Her mother's arms had felt like a shield, and the teddy bear in her hands had seemed like a silent promise of strength. Amanda smiled through her tears as she recounted the memory to David. She always knew the right thing to say, didn't she? David nodded. She had a way of making the world seem less scary. The room grew quiet as the weight of their memories settled around them. Amanda stared at the teddy bear, her fingers running over its patched paw. I regret not being there more, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so caught up in my own life. I didn't even realize how much I'd missed until it was too late. David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You loved her, Amanda. She knew that, and she wouldn't want you to carry this guilt. Amanda nodded, though the ache in her chest didn't fully subside. I think I was scared, she said, scared that if I let myself remember, it would hurt too much. But now I see how much she's still here in everything she left behind. Amanda picked up the teddy bear again, holding it close. Thank you, David, for this, for everything. David smiled. It's what she would have wanted, for us to remember her like this. As Amanda left David's house that evening, the teddy bear tucked securely under her arm, she felt something shift inside her. The grief that had weighed her down for years seemed lighter now, replaced by a bittersweet sense of gratitude. Driving home, she glanced at the bear in the passenger seat. "You're still here, Mom," she whispered. "You never really left." Amanda stepped into the warm glow of her apartment, the teddy bear cradled carefully in her hands. The faint scent of cinnamon lingered from the pie she had baked earlier, an effort to recreate the comforting smells of her childhood home. Lily's giggles drifted from her bedroom, a sound that made Amanda's heart swell. It was time, she thought, time to share what had been tucked away for so long. "Lily?" Amanda called, her voice soft but steady. The 8-year-old peeked her head out from the doorway, her hair tousled and her smile wide. "Yeah, Mom?" "I have something special to show you," Amanda said, motioning for her daughter to join her on the couch. Lily's eyes widened as she climbed onto the couch, her gaze fixed on the small bear in Amanda's lap. "Who's that?" she asked curiously, pointing at the toy. Amanda smiled, brushing her fingers over the bear's worn fur. "This was my favorite teddy bear when I was your age. Grandma gave him to me," Lily gasped. "Grandma? You mean your mom?" Amanda nodded, her smile softening. "Yes, she gave it to me when I was little, and I took him everywhere. When I was sad or scared, he was always there to make me feel better. Just like Grandma was." Lily reached out to touch the bear, her small fingers grazing its patched paw. "He looks old but nice," she said thoughtfully. "Does he have a name?" Amanda chuckled. "I called him Mr. Buttons when I was your age. I guess the name stuck." Lily giggled. "Hi, Mr. Buttons." Amanda's heart swelled at the sight of her daughter connecting with something so precious. "But you know what makes Mr. Buttons really special?" she asked, leaning closer. "What?" Lily asked, her curiosity piqued. Amanda pressed the small button on the bear's paw, and the familiar voice of her mother filled the room. "Amanda, sweetheart, remember, Mom loves you. Always." Lily's mouth dropped open in surprise. Is that Grandma?" "Yes," Amanda whispered, her voice trembling. "That's her voice. Uncle David found an old recording of her and put it inside Mr. Buttons so we could always remember her." Lily's hands covered her mouth, her wide eyes brimming with emotion. "I can't believe it. She sounds so nice, just like you said she would." Amanda pressed the button again, letting the voice play once more. Tears gathered in her eyes as Lily leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, listening intently. "Mom," Lily whispered after a moment, "what was Grandma like?" Amanda smiled through her tears, stroking Lily's hair. "She was kind, patient, and always knew how to make me feel loved. She had a way of turning even the smallest moments into something magical." "Like what?" Lily asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Like baking pies together on Sunday mornings," Amanda said. "The whole house would smell like apples and cinnamon, and she'd let me roll out the dough even though I wasn't very good at it." Lily giggled. "That's why you're so good at making pie now." Amanda laughed, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Exactly. And at night, she'd sit by my bed and tell me stories. My favorite was about a little bunny who wanted to touch the moon. She always ended it by saying, 'You can be anything you want to be, as long as you never stop reaching.'" "Wow," Lily said, her eyes shining. "Grandma sounds amazing." Amanda held Lily close, her voice soft. "She was, sweetheart. And I want you to know that even though she's not here anymore, her love is still with us. It's in the pies we bake, the stories we tell, and even in Mr. Buttons." Lily nodded solemnly, looking down at the teddy bear. "I wish I could have met her." Amanda's throat tightened, but she smiled. "You would have loved her, and she would have loved you. You remind me so much of her sometimes." "Really?" Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. "Really?" Amanda said, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You have her kindness and her curiosity, and now you have her voice to remind you of how much she loved us." Lily hugged Mr. Buttons tightly, her small arms encircling the bear. "Can I keep him in my room?" Amanda hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. "Of course, sweetheart. Just promise me one thing." "What?" Lily asked, looking up. "Whenever you're feeling sad or lonely, press the button and listen to Grandma's voice. She'll always be there for you, Amanda said. Lily nodded earnestly. I promise. As Lily disappeared into her room with Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm, Amanda sat alone in the living room, her heart full. For years, she had carried the weight of her grief, afraid to share it with anyone, even her own daughter. But tonight, something had shifted. She had always feared that talking about her mother would reopen old wounds, but instead, it had brought her closer to Lily and reminded her of the strength and love that her mother had instilled in her. For the first time in years, Amanda felt at peace. Her mother's voice wasn't just a reminder of what was lost, it was a reminder of what had always been there. Later that night, Amanda peeked into Lily's room. Her daughter was fast asleep, clutching Mr. Buttons tightly to her chest. Amanda smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Quietly, she whispered, "Good night, Mom. Thank you for teaching me how to love." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Amanda felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would make sure that Lily grew up knowing the same love, the same stories, and the same strength that had defined her childhood. Because some legacies are too precious to let fade. The following morning, Amanda sat at the dining table with a notebook open in front of her. The pages were blank, but her mind buzzed with memories, each one clamoring for a place on the crisp white paper. She held a pen in her hand, its weight unfamiliar after so long without writing, but today felt like the perfect time to begin. On the first page, she wrote the words, "For Lily, so you always know where you come from and how much you're loved." Amanda paused, taking a deep breath as she allowed herself to journey back in time. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, clear and comforting, as she began to jot down the stories that had defined her childhood. The first story Amanda wrote was about Sunday mornings in the kitchen. She described the scent of apples and cinnamon filling the house, the sound of the rolling pin against the counter, and the way her mother's laugh always seemed to dance through the air as they baked together. She remembered how her mother would let her roll the dough, even when it turned out uneven, and how she'd say, "It doesn't have to be perfect, Amanda. It just has to be made with love." Next, Amanda wrote about the bedtime stories under the glow of the lamp. She captured every detail of her favorite tale, the story of the little bunny who dreamed of touching the moon, and the way her mother would always finish with, "You can be anything you want to be, as long as you never stop reaching." Finally, Amanda wrote about the day her mother patched up Mr. Buttons after he was torn. She recounted how her mother had explained that love wasn't about keeping things perfect. It was about fixing them when they were broken. As she wrote, Amanda felt an overwhelming sense of peace. These weren't just stories, they were lessons, memories, and pieces of her mother's heart that she could pass down to Lily. Later that afternoon, Amanda called Lily into the kitchen. The little girl bounded in, her eyes lighting up when she saw the ingredients spread across the counter. "Are we making pie?" Lily asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. Amanda nodded, tying an apron around her daughter. "It's time you learn the family recipe." Lily clapped her hands, her enthusiasm infectious. Together, they peeled apples, measured out sugar and cinnamon, and mixed the ingredients in a large bowl. Amanda watched as Lily carefully rolled out the dough, her tiny hands working diligently despite the uneven edges. "Grandma used to say it doesn't have to be perfect," Amanda said, smiling as she sprinkled flour over the counter. Lily tilted her head. "What did she mean?" "She meant that what matters most is the love you put into it," Amanda explained, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "That's what makes it special." As the pie baked in the oven, filling the house with its warm, familiar aroma, Amanda and Lily sat together at the kitchen table. Amanda told her daughter more stories about Grandma, the way she hummed off-key when she cooked, how she always knew when Amanda needed a hug, and the countless times she turned ordinary moments into magical ones. Lily listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. "Grandma sounds amazing," she said softly. "She was," Amanda replied, her voice full of love. "And a part of her is in everything we do, even now." That evening, after dinner and a warm slice of pie, Amanda tucked Lily into bed. Mr. Buttons sat on the pillow next to her, his patched paw resting against Lily's hand. "Mom?" Lily asked, her voice sleepy but curious. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Grandma would have liked me? Amanda's heart ached at the question, but she smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. She wouldn't just like you, Lily. She would love you more than anything. Just like I do. Lily's face lit up with a soft smile. I think I love her too, even though I never met her. Tears welled in Amanda's eyes as she leaned down to kiss her daughter's forehead. That's because her love is all around us, and it always will be. Once Lily had fallen asleep, Amanda lingered in the doorway, watching her daughter's peaceful face illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. Mr. Buttons was tucked securely in Lily's arms, and Amanda couldn't help but see a reflection of her own childhood in the moment. She quietly walked to the living room and picked up the notebook she had been writing in earlier. As she flipped through the pages, a deep sense of purpose settled over her. These stories were more than just memories. They were a bridge between generations, a way to ensure her mother's love and lessons would never fade. Amanda placed the notebook on the coffee table and glanced at the photograph of her mother sitting on the shelf nearby. The picture seemed to radiate warmth, as though her mother's presence was still there, watching over them. Thank you, Mom, Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. For everything. For teaching me how to love and how to pass it on. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, Amanda felt lighter than she had in years. She knew the grief would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something beautiful, something she could share with Lily, and one day, her daughter's children. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the night. In Lily's room, Mr. Buttons rested in her embrace, his patched paw peeking out from under the blanket. Amanda peeked in one last time, her heart swelling with gratitude as she saw her daughter sleeping soundly. For the first time in a long while, Amanda felt her mother's love not as a painful absence, but as a guiding light. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the hallway mirror. For a fleeting moment, she saw her mother's eyes looking back at her. Smiling, Amanda whispered, "Good night, Mom."